There is a particular kind of pain that visits those who love Jesus sincerely, but feel perpetually inadequate in that love. It is not the pain of rebellion or indifference. It is the pain of wanting desperately to give him everything, and feeling like what you have to give is nothing, of desiring holiness with real intensity, and yet looking at your daily life and seeing only smallness, ordinariness, failure, of reading about the great saints and their heroic acts, and then looking at yourself and wondering if your love even counts. If you have felt this pain, you know it intimately. You know the quiet shame of comparing your spiritual life to what you imagine it should be and finding it wanting, the discouragement that settles in after another day of falling into the same weaknesses, the fear that maybe you are simply not the kind of person who can truly love God the way he deserves to be loved. And beneath all of this is a question you may have never articulated, but that drives the entire struggle. What does Jesus actually want from me? What is he asking for when he looks at someone like me, someone who tries but fails, who desires but cannot achieve, who loves but feels that love is too small, too flawed, too insufficient to matter? This is the question Saint Thérèse of Lisieux spent her entire life answering. Not through theological treatises or mystical visions, though she had those, but through the slow, painful, ultimately liberating discovery of what Jesus actually asks from the soul that feels it is not enough. And here is what she discovered, what shattered her assumptions and rebuilt her entire spiritual life on a completely different foundation. Jesus does not ask you to be enough. He asks you to trust that he is. Let me say that again because it is so easy to miss, so countercultural, so opposed to everything you have been trained to believe about how love works, and how relationships function, and how you earn a place in someone's heart. Jesus does not ask you to be enough. He never did. He never will. The entire premise of the question, am I enough for God, is based on a misunderstanding of how grace operates, how mercy flows, how the relationship between the soul and God is actually structured. You are not enough. You will never be enough. And Jesus knows this. He has always known this. When he called you into relationship with him, he did not do so under the illusion that you would eventually become sufficient through your own effort. He called you precisely in your insufficiency, with full knowledge of every weakness you would struggle with, every failure you would repeat, every gap between who you are and who you long to be. And he calls you still, not despite your insufficiency, but into it. Because insufficiency is not a barrier to relationship with God, it is the entry point. Have you ever felt this? The relief that comes when you finally stop trying to convince God and yourself that you are more than you are? When you drop the exhausting performance of spiritual competence and simply admit, I am not enough, I have never been enough, and I am terrified that this disqualifies me from the love I want most. This is the moment Thérèse lived in almost constantly. She felt small. She felt insufficient. She looked at what she had to offer God, a hidden life in a small convent, no dramatic penances, no extraordinary virtues, just daily fidelity to small tasks done with varying degrees of success, and she felt the gap keenly. But instead of despairing, she asked Jesus directly, "What do you want from me? Not what do the spiritual books say you want, not what do the great saints offer you. What do you want from me exactly as I am, with exactly what I have, which feels like nothing?" And the answer she received changed everything. Not in a single mystical experience, but through years of learning to hear his voice in scripture, in prayer, in the quiet movements of her heart. The answer was not what she expected. It was simpler, more challenging, more liberating. Jesus said, in effect, I want your trust, not your achievement, not your perfection, not your ability to finally become worthy of my love, just your trust, your willingness to believe that my love for you does not depend on your sufficiency, but on my mercy, your willingness to let me love you as you are, rather than as you think you should be. This is what Jesus asks from those who feel they are not enough, and it is both easier and harder than what you have been trying to give him. Easier because it does not require you to be someone you are not. It does not demand that you achieve some threshold of holiness before he will fully accept you. It does not make the relationship conditional on your performance. Harder because trust, real trust, requires something the soul resists with almost infinite creativity: vulnerability. The vulnerability of approaching God with empty hands. The vulnerability of admitting you need what you cannot provide for yourself. The vulnerability of releasing control over your spiritual life and trusting it entirely to someone else. Most people would rather exhaust themselves trying to be enough than risk the vulnerability of admitting they never will be. Because exhaustion at least feels like you are doing something. Striving at least feels productive. The project of self-improvement at least gives you the illusion of control. But trust requires putting down all of that. It requires standing before God with nothing to present, nothing to prove, nothing to earn His love with, and believing that He loves you anyway, that He has always loved you, that His love was never waiting for you to become sufficient. Let me ask you something honestly. What would you lose if you stopped trying to be enough? What identity would collapse? What carefully maintained self-image would crumble? What would you have to admit about yourself that you have spent years trying to avoid? Whatever you would lose, that is what Jesus is asking you to release, not because He wants to take something from you, but because what you are holding on to is preventing you from receiving what He wants to give you. The experience of being loved, not for what you achieve, but for who you are. The rest of knowing that your worth is not something you generate, but something He declares. The freedom of approaching Him not as someone trying to earn their place, but as someone who has already been given a place and is simply learning to inhabit it. This is what Thérèse discovered, and it is what she spent the rest of her life trying to communicate to a world full of souls who, like her, felt they were not enough and were exhausting themselves trying to become so. She discovered that Jesus does not need your greatness. He already has all the greatness of heaven and earth at His disposal. What He desires from you is something only you can give, the specific love of your specific heart, offered from your specific smallness, with your specific limitations fully acknowledged. Because here is the truth that transforms the entire question. Your smallness is not an obstacle to loving Jesus. It is the very condition that makes your love most pleasing to Him. Not because He takes pleasure in your weakness, but because when you love Him from your acknowledged poverty, when you offer Him affection knowing it is insufficient, when you approach Him with nothing to recommend you except need, that love is pure. It is not trying to earn anything. It is not performing to impress. It is simply love, offered because He is worthy, regardless of whether you are. And this kind of love, small, inadequate, offered anyway, is what moves the heart of God more than any great achievement ever could. Have you ever considered this? That the insufficiency you feel ashamed of might actually be the doorway to the kind of love Jesus desires most? That the gaps in your spiritual life, the failures you keep repeating, the smallness that makes you feel disqualified, might actually be positioning you exactly where grace can reach you most effectively. This is the scandal of what Jesus asks. He is not asking you to close the gaps. He is asking you to stop pretending they are not there. He is not asking you to overcome your smallness. He is asking you to bring your smallness to Him and trust that it is enough, not because you are sufficient, but because His mercy is. Thérèse learned to do this in the most practical daily ways. When she failed in patience instead of spending hours in self-recrimination, she would turn to Jesus immediately and say something like, "You see, Lord, this is what I am without you, but I trust you to make me patient anyway." When she felt too small for the great desires burning in her heart, instead of despairing, she would tell Jesus, "You gave me these desires. You must have a way to fulfill them that does not depend on my capacity." This is not resignation. This is not spiritual passivity. This is active trust. The choice to relate to Jesus not through the project of making yourself worthy, but through the relationship of trusting His mercy to cover every insufficiency. And the result? Not perfection. Thérèse never became perfect in this life, but peace, deep, settled, unshakable peace, the peace of knowing that your relationship with God does not depend on your ability to be enough, because it never did. The peace of resting in love that has nothing to do with your merit and everything to do with His nature. This is what Jesus asks from those who feel they are not enough. Not more effort, not greater achievement, not the exhausting project of trying to make yourself sufficient. Just trust. Simple, daily, often uncomfortable trust that His love is real, His mercy is sufficient, and your smallness is not a barrier but an invitation. The invitation to stop fighting and start receiving, to stop earning and start trusting, to stop measuring yourself against some impossible standard and start resting in the only measurement that matters, that you are His, He is yours, and nothing about your insufficiency changes that fundamental reality. There is a moment in Thérèse's spiritual journey that reveals exactly what Jesus asks from those who feel inadequate. And it is not a moment of triumph, but a moment of complete breakdown. She describes it in her autobiography with striking honesty. She had been trying to practice virtue, trying to be patient with a particularly difficult sister in her community, trying to show charity even when she felt none, trying to be the kind of religious she thought God wanted her to be. And she failed. Repeatedly. The sister irritated her. Her patience ran out. Her charity felt forced and fake. And one day, after another failure, instead of trying harder or making new resolutions, something different happened. She simply stopped. She went to Jesus and told Him the truth. I cannot do this. I have tried and I keep failing. I want to be patient and charitable, but I am not. I want to love the way you ask me to love, but I do not have it in me. What do you want from me when I cannot give you what you deserve? And in that moment of complete honesty, of abandoning the pretense that she could manufacture virtue through willpower, she heard, not audibly, but clearly in her soul, what Jesus actually wanted from her. Not the successful practice of virtue, that would be wonderful, but it was not the foundation of the relationship. What He wanted was exactly what she had just given Him, her honest poverty, her admission of need, her willingness to come to Him not with achievements to present, but with empty hands to fill. He wanted her trust more than her success. He wanted her dependence more than her competence. He wanted her to stop trying to love Him through her own strength and start allowing Him to love through her despite her weakness. This distinction is everything. Most people spend their entire spiritual lives trying to generate love for God through effort. They pray more, serve more, sacrifice more, examine their conscience more, all in an attempt to produce the quality of love they believe God requires. But Jesus is not asking you to produce love. He is asking you to receive it. And in receiving it, in letting yourself be loved exactly as you are, with all your insufficiency fully exposed, you become capable of a kind of love you could never generate on your own. Not your love for Him, but His love flowing through you. Have you ever experienced the difference between trying to love God and allowing His love to move through you? Between generating charity through effort and simply being a channel for a charity that comes from beyond yourself? The first approach exhausts you because you are constantly depleting your own resources. The second approach sustains you because you are drawing from a source that never runs dry. But the second approach requires something the first does not: the humility to admit you do not have it in yourself. The vulnerability to approach God not as someone bringing an offering, but as someone needing to be filled. The trust to believe that when you show up empty, He will not turn you away but will fill you with exactly what you need, not once, but every single time. Thérèse discovered that this is what Jesus meant when He said, His yoke is easy and His burden light. Not that following Him requires no effort, but that the effort He asks for is fundamentally different from the effort of trying to be sufficient. He asks for the effort of trust, of showing up daily before Him with your poverty exposed, of resisting the urge to pretend you are more than you are, of bringing Him your actual self rather than the self you wish you were. This trust is harder than striving because it feels passive, vulnerable, out of control. Striving at least gives you something to do, something to measure, some way to feel like you are contributing to your salvation. But trust requires you to stop contributing and start receiving. To acknowledge that salvation is not a partnership where you do your part and God does His. It is a gift, entirely gift, where God does everything, and you simply open your hands to receive what He gives. Let me ask you something that might be uncomfortable. Are you willing to be that vulnerable? To show up before Jesus tomorrow morning with nothing to offer but need? To pray not with carefully constructed words that prove your devotion, but with honest admission of your poverty? To relate to him not as an employee hoping for a good performance review, but as a child trusting a father's love? Most people cannot do this, not because they lack faith, but because it requires a death, the death of the self-sufficient self, the death of the spiritual identity built on achievement, the death of the pride that insists you must bring something valuable to the relationship. But this death is not the end. It is the beginning. It is the death that leads to life, because on the other side of it, you discover something you could never find while trying to be enough. You discover that you are already loved, that you have always been loved, that God's love for you was never conditional on your sufficiency and never will be. And this discovery changes everything, not because it makes you perfect, but because it makes you free. Free to fail without despair, free to be small without shame, free to approach God not with anxiety about whether you are measuring up, but with confidence that His mercy is already measuring you and finding you beloved. Thérèse wrote that once she understood this, once she truly grasped that Jesus was not asking her to be great, but asking her to be little, to be needy, to be constantly dependent on His mercy, the entire spiritual life became different. Not easier in the sense of requiring less effort, but lighter, because the weight she had been carrying, the weight of trying to make herself worthy, was a weight Jesus never asked her to carry. He was carrying it. He had always been carrying it. She only needed to stop trying to carry it herself and let Him do what He came to do: bear the burden, fill the emptiness, love the unlovable, make holy the unholy. This is what Jesus asks from those who feel they are not enough. He asks you to stop trying to be. He asks you to bring Him your insufficiency instead of hiding it. He asks you to trust that when He looks at you, He does not see a project that needs fixing, but a beloved child that needs only to accept the love already being poured out. And when you finally make this shift, when you stop trying to earn what is already yours and start receiving it, you discover that the insufficiency you spent years fighting against was never the problem. The problem was believing that your worth depends on overcoming it. It does not. It never did. Your worth is a declaration God made over you before you did anything right or wrong. And nothing you do, no failure, no weakness, no gap between who you are and who you wish you were, can change that declaration. This is the gospel Thérèse lived. This is the message she died trying to communicate. This is what Jesus asks from those who feel they are not enough. Not to become enough, but to trust that He already is. And in that trust, however faltering, however mixed with doubt, however imperfectly offered, you give Him exactly what He wants. Not your greatness, your poverty, not your strength, your weakness offered to His strength, not your sufficiency, your need met by His infinite supply. This is enough. You, exactly as you are, trusting Him exactly as He is. This is what He asks. This is what He has always asked. And this is what transforms the soul, not through achievement, but through surrender. Not through becoming more, but through finally accepting that you are loved as less, that your smallness is not a barrier, but the very place where His greatness can most fully shine. There is a prayer Thérèse prayed that summarizes everything Jesus asks from those who feel inadequate. It is not a long prayer. It is not theologically complex. But it captures the essence of what trust looks like when it stops performing and starts being honest. She prayed, "Jesus, I am too small to perform great actions, and my own folly is this, to hope that your love will accept me as a victim. My folly consists in begging the eagles, my brothers, to obtain for me the favor of flying toward the sun of love with the divine eagle's own wings." Notice what she is saying. She is not pretending to be an eagle. She is not trying to generate her own wings through effort. She is not even asking Jesus to make her into something she is not. She is simply asking to be carried by Him, to fly not with her own strength, but with His. This is the posture Jesus asks for, not the pretense of sufficiency, but the honest admission of insufficiency combined with trust that He is sufficient. Not the claim that you can climb to holiness on your own, but the request to be carried there by the one who can. Have you ever prayed this way? Not asking God to make you more capable, more virtuous, more sufficient in yourself, but asking Him to simply do in you what you cannot do for yourself. Not asking to become an eagle, but asking to fly anyway because He is willing to carry you? This is the prayer of spiritual childhood, the prayer of someone who has stopped fighting the reality of their smallness and started trusting that smallness is exactly what God wants to work with. And the result of this prayer is not immediate transformation into a spiritual giant. The result is peace, the peace of knowing that your relationship with God is secure, not because you are enough, but because He is. The peace of bringing your failures to Him every morning and trusting that His mercy is new every morning. The peace of living without the constant anxiety of measuring whether you are progressing fast enough, loving deeply enough, changing sufficiently. Because the measurement stops being about you and starts being about Him. And His love, His mercy, His faithfulness, these things never change regardless of how many times you fail or how slowly you grow. Thérèse lived in this peace, not because she was perfect. Her diary records regular failures, regular frustrations with herself, regular moments of feeling small and inadequate. But she had learned not to let those moments define her relationship with God. She had learned to bring them to Him immediately, to trust His mercy to cover them, to rest in the knowledge that His love was not conditional on her perfection. And in that rest, something miraculous happened. Not that she became perfect, but that she became free. Free to love without constantly measuring the quality of her love. Free to serve without needing recognition or results. Free to fail without despair, because failure no longer threatened her security in God's love. This freedom is what Jesus offers to everyone who feels they are not enough. Not the freedom that comes from finally becoming sufficient, but the freedom that comes from accepting that you never will be, and discovering that God's love for you was never waiting for sufficiency in the first place. Let me ask you one final question. What would your spiritual life look like if you believed this, really believed it? If you woke tomorrow and related to Jesus not as someone you are trying to impress, but as someone who already sees every weakness you have and loves you completely anyway. What would prayer become? Not performance, but conversation. Not proving your devotion, but resting in His. What would failure become? Not catastrophe, but opportunity. Opportunity to experience mercy, to practice trust, to discover again that His love does not fluctuate with your performance. What would your daily life become? Not a constant test of whether you are measuring up, but a series of moments to receive grace, to offer small loves, to trust that God is working in ways you cannot see or measure. This is what Jesus asks from those who feel they are not enough. He asks you to stop trying to be enough and start trusting that He is. He asks you to bring your poverty instead of hiding it. He asks you to approach Him as you actually are rather than as you wish you were. And when you do, when you finally risk the vulnerability of showing up empty-handed, when you finally release the exhausting project of self-made holiness, when you finally trust that your smallness is not a disqualification, but an invitation, you discover what Thérèse discovered, that you have been loved all along, that the insufficiency you felt ashamed of is the very thing that positions you to receive mercy most fully, that Jesus was never waiting for you to become enough because He came precisely for those who know they never will be. This is the gospel, this is grace, this is what transforms souls, not through achievement, but through surrender. And this is what Jesus asks, not your perfection, but your trust. Not your greatness, but your willingness to be small enough to be carried all the way home.